So now that America has officially entered into World War I in April of 1917, we're going to look at war on the home front. So how exactly did Americans deal with the war effort? How did they support it? What are some of the different things that they did during the war to either, again, help out at home or just help out the soldiers that were going overseas? So we know that one of the ways that the U.S. is going to get support, for the America entering into World War I is without a question going to be propaganda. And in that Uncle Sam poster that I showed you yesterday, right, I want you for the US military, you're not going to get everyone that's going to willingly volunteer for the draft. Or excuse me, for the military. So as a result, there's going to be a draft. So with America entering World War I in April of 1917, there is going to be a massive need for military force. There were about 2 million people who had volunteered for the military during World War I. However, there is still going to be a need for a draft, and by June 5th of 1917, the draft is going to be implemented for men ages 18 to 45. Even today, the draft is only eligible for men. It is not eligible for women. I would say really since the 1970s, you have been pushing for women to get the ERA, which is the Equal Rights Amendment. And it's not just men, but there are women who have also spoken out against the ERA. And one of their biggest concerns is that if the Equal Rights Amendment is passed, women themselves will also be eligible for the draft. Now, in some countries, women have to serve in the military, even if it's just for a year. Countries like Israel, everyone's required, whether you are a man or a woman, to do so. However, here in the United States of America, for it to be eligible for the draft, you only have to be a man and really between those ages. So why do you want someone, say, ages 18 to 45? Why not your 70-year-old grandfather? Well, they're 70 years old, so the chances of them doing well in the war and being able to survive and being able to run on foot isn't as likely as someone who is the age of 18. But like I said, 2 million men had volunteered for the war. 2.8 million ended up being drafted. It's actually considered one of the more successful drafts, and the reason being is that only 350,000 people dodged the draft. What we mean, or what they might be called, are draft dodgers. So those are people who, escaped to Canada. Maybe they, just kind of left the country in general, or they kind of came up with a quote unquote excuse like, hey, I have this medical reason, so this is why I can't enter, or whatever it may be. Some of them just went into hiding. Some of them just refused to report. It really just depends. A lot of these men were supposed to get 6 months training. They were lucky if they got 6 weeks. So it really was sort of like hastily, hey, we need people to serve in the war. Were there women that served in World War I? Yes, absolutely. For the most part, they were in what we call very traditional gender roles, meaning the women that served in World War I served as nurses. You also had men of color that served as well. However, they were in segregated units. So whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, whatever it may be, they were segregated at this time, and it's not until 1948 that the military officially gets desegregated. But a draft was instituted, and like I said, it is considered one of the more successful drafts. And that kind of gives you an idea as to what a draft card would look like. You also have the Food and Fuel Administrations that are going to be developed in the United States to, again, help garner support for the war effort. The Food Administration is going to be headed by Herbert Hoover. His name is going to sound very familiar when we come back from Thanksgiving break. He's eventually going to become a president. He's also going to be the president during the Great Depression, which is the biggest economic hardship the United States has ever faced. So Herbert Hoover, his goal was, again, to get people to volunteer for the efforts. So even if you're not serving overseas in Europe and you're not in the trenches, there are things that you could obviously do at home. And there were a few things that were very popular, particularly in conserving foods. So they would ask people to plant their own gardens. So you can kind of see in the image here with Uncle Sam, it would be like a victory garden. So hey, rather than taking food from the grocery store, that food can be sent overseas to make sure our soldiers are fed. So by planting a garden in your backyard, whether it's your own tomatoes or your own lemons or whatever it may be, you are helping conserve for others. They would do things like meatless Mondays. Hey, don't eat meat on Mondays. That way, that food can be sent overseas to help feed our soldiers. And this became very popular during World War I. What wasn't so popular was the Fuel Administration. They were doing things like asking for lightless nights, where people would not turn on their lights at night to conserve electricity and conserve energy. The idea was that that energy could be used to help produce weapons for the war, or help mass produce items, whatever it may be. They would have things like heatless Tuesdays, where the idea is, hey, don't turn on your heat. Again, save natural gas. But that wasn't very popular. But one of the things that gets instituted by the Food and Fuel Administration is something that we experienced just last week, and that's going to be daylight savings time. When daylight savings time was created, it was to conserve energy, right? That was the idea, is that if we're conserving energy, we're helping out the war effort abroad. And we've had daylight savings time ever since. There are some people who are calling to get rid of it, saying it's completely outdated, there's no point in having it anymore, so on and so forth. But in 2018, in our California midterm elections, one of the propositions was to get rid of daylight savings time, and America decided we would go ahead and keep it. And one of the big things that's going to break out during World War I is not the war itself, it's actually going to be an epidemic. Or even a pandemic, as some might call it. But it's actually really called an epidemic, but it's going to be the Spanish flu. I'm sure that with COVID-19, it's something that you've probably heard quite a bit about. But the Spanish flu, it gets a bad name. Even though it's called the Spanish flu actually didn't begin in Spain. It actually began in France. And there are some people who actually think it might have started in the United States, particularly in the state of Kansas. So why exactly do we call it the Spanish flu? Well, during this time, World War I was happening. Spain was neutral. They were not involved in World War I at all. Because there was such a big concern about the war effort, many newspapers in both France, Britain, as well as the United States focused on the war effort itself, didn't really even talk about the flu. Well, in Spain, that wasn't the case because they weren't involved in the war wasn't that big of a deal to them. The flu, however, actually was. And so because Spain was very open about the fact that, hey, we've got this sickness that's killing all these people, it ends up getting the name of the Spanish flu, even though it didn't actually begin in Spain. It's going to very quickly spread throughout Europe as well as the United States, and the Spanish flu itself is going to kill more soldiers and civilians alike than the war itself ever actually did. And to give you an idea of how many people actually died, in India, 12 million people are going to be killed as a result of the Spanish flu. You could basically look at that as being about a third of all Californians. Quite a bit of people. In Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, 1,500 people are going to die in a single day. I would say with most of our COVID numbers, the deaths have been maybe around like the 2,000 mark per day, but that's just in the United States where our population is well over 300 million. So for 1,500 people to die in a single day in a single city, quite a bit. But overall, the flu is going to kill at least 20 million people worldwide, double the number of soldiers that are actually killed in World War I. It's why you've had a lot of people who have freaked out over COVID-19 because there was this fear of, hey, we don't exactly know what's going to happen. And it's why the initial shutdowns happened in March. There was this fear that COVID-19 was going to break out like Ebola. If you remember, Ebola was a big thing, I would say, back in 2014. What was very frightful about Ebola was, like COVID, it doesn't have a cure. However, the death rate was a lot higher with Ebola. The death rate is between 40 and 50%. So anyone that contracts Ebola, it's between 40 and 50%. Whereas with COVID, I haven't calculated the rate recently, but it's normally around 3% of people that get it actually die. But that's why the initial shutdowns happened in March. There was this fear it could be an Ebola crisis, and they were also like, hey, our hospitals aren't going to be able to handle it. I would say now most people are very sort of frustrated with the shutdowns. They're waiting for life to get back to normal, and with the vaccine hopefully on the way, things will start to look up. But disease is very different than, say, a war, because disease doesn't care who you are, whether you're the public enemy number one, or you're the ally, or whatever it may be. If it gets you, it'll kill you. In the United States, of course, when World War I breaks out, you're going to see a lot of people, especially from the government, who are going to be looking to try to script the narrative as best they can, aka in support for the war. A really great example of that is from Iron Jawed Angels. If you remember watching that movie, you have the suffragists who are standing outside the White House. They're protesting against the president for not allowing women to vote. And there were a lot of people who were upset that they were protesting during the middle of the war. They were calling them unpatriotic, they're not unladylike, they're un-American. And what you saw happen is that the White House ended up, saying that they were obstructing justice to go ahead and throw them in jail because they didn't like the protests. That's going to happen quite a bit throughout World War I. You're going to have the Espionage and Sedition Acts that are going to be passed and basically allow the government to, quote unquote, arrest anybody who they felt, was spying on the U.S., was possibly committing treason. And again, were these people really spying or committing treason? For the most part, no, but they were outspoken about the war. They were in support of America entering into World War I. And so as a result, the government's going to throw a lot of these people in jail or fine them. Because of this, the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, it's going to be created to protect the rights of Americans, and it's going to use the legal system to protect citizens and release the unrightfully imprisoned. The ACLU, still around today. They're in the news quite a bit. I would say the last time we really heard quite a bit about them is when we saw the Black Lives Matter protests breaking out in June. You had a lot of people who were claiming many that were arrested for absolutely no reason. They weren't participating in the rioting or the looting, but they were arrested just cause. And so the ACLU, a lot of people donated money to them to help bail those protesters out. But one of the big things that's going to come out of World War I is going to be this court case known as Schneck versus the United States. And here's what the Supreme Court ruled. The Supreme Court invented this idea of clear and present danger to test to determine when a state could limit an individual's right to free speech. So the ACLU, like others, were quite upset that they felt there was a limitation on free speech. AKA, if people wanted to speak out against the war, then guess what? They were thrown in jail. Now that violates the First Amendment, right? We know that this is true. However, with Schneck versus the United States, it is going to put some limits on free speech. So again, that clear and present danger test is developed. If I go into a movie theater and I yell fire and there is no fire, that is not free speech, right? I would go to jail because I am intentionally creating chaos. If I say I'm going to come home and I'm going to murder your whole family and you perceive that to be real, that is not free speech. That is a threat. And again, I would go to jail for that. But Schneck versus the United States, it is very important because it's one of the few times the United States has actually put a limit on free speech, right? So it is definitely a big deal. So America enters into World War I in April of 1917, and by November of 1918, the war is going to end. It ends on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. So you kind of might recognize this day. That is November 11th. It's the anniversary of the war, becomes known as Armistice Day. That's what they celebrate in Europe. However, here it's known as Veterans Day. So that's why we get November 11th off. This was something that I came up with a few students. It also came up when Mr. Mason asked me. He was like, why are we getting some random Wednesday off? Why aren't we getting a 3-day weekend by taking Monday or Friday off? Well, veterans had asked that with November 11th, that's now known as Veterans Day, that whatever day the holiday actually falls on, that is the day that we Americans take off. So if it falls off on a Wednesday, like it will tomorrow, then we should go ahead and take off Wednesday and represent that day. If it falls, so unless it falls on a Saturday or a Sunday, whatever day of the week it falls on, that's the day that we take off. But if Veterans Day falls on a Saturday, typically you'll see people who will either pick Friday or Monday to observe the holiday. So it's very different than I would say like Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. We always observe it on like the 3rd January or the 3rd Monday of January, whether it's his actual birthday or not. But Veterans Day is different. We celebrate it no matter what day it falls on. So like next year, it'll be celebrated on a Thursday. But the war officially ends on November 11th of 1918. When the war ends, Woodrow Wilson is going to create what becomes known as the 14 points. And his goal with the 14 points is to hope that a world war is never going to break out again. When you read the 14 points and you'll kind of look at it on Thursday, it's very like kumbaya, like this idea that we can all live peacefully together and nothing bad's ever going to happen again. And if we just recognize one another's independence, then we can all get along. And we know that that's not going to be the case because about 20 years later, World War II is officially going to break out. One of the big things that comes out of Wilson's 14 points is the creation of the League of Nations. The idea is that we would talk it out rather than going to war. Although the League of Nations ends up being a failure, after World War II, the League of Nations is going to be the inspiration for the UN or the United Nations, which is still around today. The Treaty of Versailles is officially going to end World War I, but the Treaty of Versailles is really going to be what sets up World War II. So with World War I, we look at those 4 long-term causes, and the short-term cause is what kicks off World War I. With World War II, it's what happens at the end of World War I that officially begins World War II. The Treaty of Versailles is going to end World War I. Germany is going to be blamed for everything, and afterwards, the world is really going to enter into an economic depression. And when that happens, you're going to see the rise of dictators throughout Europe, including Hitler, Mussolini, as well as Stalin.